The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Last week, I brought you the story of the 200 Nigerian girls who had been kidnapped by a militant Islamist group in Nigeria right out of school. And we talked about the underreporting of the story, as well as the fact that the Nigerian government did not seem particularly anxious, I guess, to put it in a relatively neutral way, particularly anxious to figure out where these girls were. Many presumed raped, some certainly presumed to be dead at this point. We also stated that the corporate media coverage of this story was almost completely non-existent. Now, in the midst of this story, it's getting more interesting and even more horrifying. In the midst of this story, the leader of the protests to find the girls has been detained. BBC is reporting that Naomi Muta, the woman leading the protests over the abduction of the girls, calling for the Nigerian government to do more to find the girls, has been detained, reportedly on the orders of the Nigerian president's wife. This is getting more and more bizarre. Naomi Muta took part in a meeting that was called by the First Lady, Patience Jonathan, and was then taken to a police station, according to some reports. Mrs. Jonathan, the First Lady, reportedly felt slighted that the mothers of the abducted girls had sent Ms. Muta to the meeting. Analysts say that Mrs. Jonathan is a politically powerful figure, but does not actually have the authority to call for anyone's detention. Ms. Muta is a representative of the community where the girls were seized from their school more than 2 weeks ago and started organizing protests outside Parliament in the capital city of Abuja. The protesters feel the government has not done enough. The government insists, Lewis, that they are interested in finding these girls, although not much seems to be happening. President Goodluck Jonathan spoke on Sunday night, last night, for the first time about the abductions and said he doesn't know where they are, but they're doing everything they can to find them. This is incredible. Now, at the same time as this, Lewis, the AP news agency quotes another community leader, Saratu Angus Dirpaya, saying that Mrs. Jonathan, the First Lady, accused the activists of fabricating the abductions altogether simply to give the government a bad name. She also said that the First Lady accused them of supporting Boko Haram, which is the militant Islamist group presumed to be guilty of these kidnappings. Now listen to this. In the meantime, Abubakar Shekau, who's the militant leader of the group Boko Haram, has threatened to sell the hundreds of schoolgirls that they abducted weeks ago. A video was sent to the AFP news agency saying that the group had taken the girls and that they are threatening to sell them. I don't even know where to go with this, Lewis. The story is getting exponentially more absurd and horrifying with every day at this point.
Yeah, it just seems like such a chaotic thing. I mean, why would the government be interested in not finding these girls? I can only imagine that there are people in the government who are just completely in bed with these Islamic militant groups.
Yeah, I mean, if we're to speculate, of course, we can come up with that. And I think, and we're not actually suggesting that that's what's going on. We're saying if it is indeed true that the government doesn't seem particularly interested, what reasons could we explain? The other reason would be, Lewis, not that they're in bed with this group, but that the group wields so much power that the government is simply afraid of taking any kind of public stand beyond just saying they want to find the girls. This is all, of course, speculation. What we do know is that as the story has gotten crazier, worldwide media coverage of the story has increased, and there is no question that this is, again, even if it's not going to find these girls alive and well, it's making the system move, and more is happening. And it is just more and more proof that when these stories receive coverage, things do happen, even if it may be too late for these particular girls.
Things do happen, but they might not necessarily be good things. Now we have the government turning on the protesters who are trying to advance the search. So I don't know. I mean, overall, is it a good thing? Yes, but I'm sure there will be some like this negative consequences.
Going from Nigeria to Brunei, Brunei has become the first East Asian country to adopt Sharia law, despite widespread condemnation around the world from any number of international human rights groups. The Islamic criminal law is set to include, listen to this, punishments such as flogging, dismemberment, and death by stoning for crimes including rape, adultery, and sodomy. These religious laws will work alongside the existing, I guess it's the civil penal code. Consensual sex between homosexuals will, of course, also be criminalized. Death by stoning is the prescribed punishment there. During a ceremony a few days ago, the Sultan of Brunei, Hassan al-Bolkiah, announced the commencement of the first phase. This is phase 1 of the Sharia-based penal code, according to the government's official website. The oil-rich kingdom of Brunei, located on the island of Borneo, has a population of only 412,000 people, slightly more populous than the country of Iceland. The country already follows conservative Islamic rule. This is just the next step. This is a quote, "A number of UN studies have revealed that women are more likely to be sentenced to death by stoning due to deeply entrenched discrimination and stereotyping against them." Conservatives in the U.S. must be really conflicted, Lewis, because on the one hand, they don't like Muslims. They oppose law based on Sharia law. They claim, some even, that President Obama is a secret Muslim who wants to bring Sharia law to this country. At the same time, much of the nitty-gritty of Sharia law is not drastically different from the Christian version of Sharia law that so many of these extremist Christians, which of course are only a small portion of all Christians in this country, want. Aside from specifically stoning, although that is in the Bible, being against homosexuality, disproportionately taking control over women's lives, men typically controlling women's lives, sodomy laws. I mean, there are many similarities here.
It's true. One difference that I've noticed is that the Christian fundamentalists don't seem to be in favor of death if there is rape. They seem to leave rape out of the equation when we talk to them for some reason.
You're actually right. It's certainly not, for the most part, it's not as high of a priority there. And that we do see here. So, and it's always interesting when we hear people in the U.S. say, you know, what Russia's doing around gay propaganda, it's not that bad. Or what Uganda's doing around the problems with gay sex and criminalizing that, it's really not that bad. Of course, none of them would ever go live in any of these countries. And the countries that they claim to be so against seem to actually have really well-functioning systems of healthcare and education. Those are often just called communist European countries.
Right. That's how you brush that off. You say communist, socialist, terrible, devil stuff or whatever.
The anti-vaccine parenting movement has gotten even crazier. Listen to this. Vanderbilt physicians have diagnosed 3 additional babies with a rare bleeding disorder that's becoming more and more common in Tennessee because parents are refusing vitamin K injections at birth. In total, there are now 7 infants between 7 weeks and 20 weeks of age who have been diagnosed with vitamin K deficiency bleeding in the last 8 months at Monroe Carell Jr. Children's Hospital at Vanderbilt. The spate of cases had led doctors to call for a national tracking system. This disorder typically affects less than 1 in 100, fewer than 1 in 100,000 newborns. But Vanderbilt doctors believe that incidences are on the rise because of the anti-vaccine movement. And they actually tell the story in an article in the Tennessean of Mark and Melissa Notowitz, who declined the shots for their twins who were born last summer. At the time, they were concerned because they had heard that there was a preservative in the shot that could lead to childhood leukemia. There was initially a correlation between the shot and childhood leukemia that was explored. Subsequent tests and studies determined that there was actually no causation there, and the theory was disproven. According to Vanderbilt doctors, the pediatricians became, the children became sick. Pediatricians determined they had never received their vitamin K injections. The craziest thing about this, Lewis, is that there seems to be just a basic confusion that not all injections are even vaccines, right? In the sense that you can have something injected that you can also take orally that doesn't by definition make it a vaccine. And now the anti-vaccine movement is just moving against anything that is delivered via an injection.
Right. It's kind of like what's happening politically, right? You have people who receive a little bit of information that they believe wholeheartedly. They don't do any of their own research. And this is what ends up happening.
Babies have been receiving the vitamin K injection since 1961. Only recently, because of the anti-vaccine movement, has this started to be connected with this bleeding disorder. The saddest part of all this is that kids are suffering because of what their parents are getting involved in politically, socially, culturally, whatever the case may be. The kids have no control over this, and that's the saddest part, isn't it?
Right. My advice is don't listen to Jenny McCarthy. Don't listen to your neighbors. Listen to physicians and doctors who know what they're talking about when it comes to vaccines.
Yeah, the problem is, though, Lewis, people who are fully bought into this will say, of course the doctors are going to give you that advice. They're part of the problem. And I mean, I don't know how you explain to someone that while doctors are not right about everything, that there is significant research into this.
Well, unfortunately, a lot of these people are learning the hard way.
Yeah, that's the saddest part, and the kids are being affected. I got a bunch of emails over the weekend about a story related to Malaysian Airlines Flight 370. We haven't spoken about that flight for weeks at this point. Of course, this is the Boeing 777 that disappeared during a flight to China. Over the weekend, a bunch of media outlets, including The Blaze, The New York Post, The International Business Times, and others, reported that 11 suspected terrorists have been arrested in connection with the disappearance of Flight 370, MH370, some allegedly with links specifically to Al-Qaeda, that they're being interrogated about the disappearance of Flight MH370. I want to be totally clear. Every indication right now is that while suspected terrorists were taken into custody, there does not appear to be any connection whatsoever to Flight MH370. We talked last week about this incredible theory, which makes no sense when you think about it, related to Jacob Rothschild and a patent on a slight improvement to semiconductor technology. That we talked about last week. We got that out of the way. This is a real story. There is evidence that these suspected terrorists have been detained and interrogated, but no evidence that it's at all connected to the flight. And Lewis, we even had a statement from one of Malaysia's most senior police chiefs who said there is no link at all between the 11 alleged militants and the disappearance of Flight MH370. I don't have that much else to say about it, but hopefully people will stop emailing us saying that there's finally been proof that terrorism is a factor in this airplane disappearance.
It's too bad that the media frenzy and nonsense around this flight is continuing. I wonder how long this is going to go on for.
We have a very special week of shows this week. It is the first week with a Friday show. More information about that is coming up. Stay with us. Excellent program for you today. Great interview coming up as well.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
Our program is mostly funded by individual viewers through the membership program, which is made possible in part by liberalbias.com. Some statistics suggest that the economy is improving in spite of having a liberal president. Those statistics obviously have a liberal bias. Find out more at liberalbias.com. Today's new member of the day is Eric Smith. No doubts at all in my mind that I am pronouncing that name correctly. It's good to have an easy one every once in a while. Eric Smith. Please join Eric as a David Pakman Show member. Because this week we are launching our Friday show, we're going to 5 shows a week. We have a great deal where if you sign up before Friday at davidpakman.com/5daysnow, you will not only lock in pre-5-day-a-week prices on your membership, you will also get a free David Pakman Show t-shirt. These have been flying off the shelves in the last few days. I think 13 or 14 people, Lewis, signed up under this new special. It's just amazing.
People are going completely berserk, David. It's quite an event.
Supposedly, it's crazier than when Michael Jackson used to come to town and everybody would just faint. People are just so fired up about the membership special. So again, remember, davidpakman.com/5days now. Only about, 96 hours left on that special. So sign up. Very, very exciting stuff. Of course, you can also support our program with the Amazon shopping. You already do. All you have to do is go to our website, davidpakman.com. On the right side, you'll see a link to Amazon. Click it, bookmark that link, use it whenever you shop. Amazon sends us back 7% to 8% of your purchase. It costs you nothing extra. We have thousands and thousands of items every month purchased through that link. Sometimes we like to mention a few of the items. Game of Thrones. Lewis, a lot of people are buying Game of Thrones DVDs. I still have only seen about half of one episode on a flight I had once. Now, I didn't get sucked into it, but it was because it was a random episode. If I started from the beginning, I'd probably like it, right?
I think you would. I suggest you, if you're going to watch it, make sure you commit to watching the entire first season, and I think you will be sufficiently sucked in. I think that applies to anyone.
That's what happened to me with Mad Men, where I watched the first 5 or 6 episodes, and I really thought it was not that great. And then I said, I'll just stick out the whole first season. Then I got way into it, and now I think it's definitely one of my favorite shows. So that's going on. Also, there's been a bit of a hiatus in terms of the regular and steady purchase of adult toys through our Amazon link. This happened a couple years ago where it seemed like a constant barrage of adult toys. Then it kind of stopped for a little while, and now it's back, Lewis. Just, I don't know if it's a seasonal thing, but the adult toys being purchased by our audience through our Amazon link, it's just every month seems to be rising now.
Must be all this hot weather, David. People are in heat.
Yeah, maybe that's what it is. Very, very good point, Lewis. Thank you. A politician suggests, what if we just abolish the minimum wage altogether and let the so-called free market decide? We've heard this before. This is Tom Coburn. He's a Republican senator from Oklahoma. Probably not a surprise to anybody that he's a Republican, but I do mention it in the interest of clarity this evening. The different elected officials sometimes like to brag about different accomplishments. And Tom Coburn's big bragging catalyst was that he is the only remaining member of Congress who voted against the minimum wage increase of 2007. He thinks minimum wage laws should be repealed altogether. He was on MSNBC, and when he was asked about the possible $10.10 an hour minimum wage increase in his state, which he said he voted against, he had the following to say. Listen.
It goes against the free market principles. Susan Collins is going to be bringing forth a better proposal. We don't know what the minimum wage should be. How'd they pick 10.10? Why not 22? Why not $100? That makes everybody make $200,000 a year. The fact is what we have is an economic system on its butt right now because we have poor leadership and poor policy. We don't have capital investment, and we don't have demand creation because of the leadership policies of this administration and this Congress. And I'm saying Republican and Democrat alike. And you're fixing a symptom rather than fixing the problem. And what we need is the demand for workers. And the Affordable Care Act, driving down hours to 27 and 26, is one of the things that is really hurting in terms of the ability of median family income to rise in this country.
But Senator, do you think there's a deal?
Yeah, just let the market decide. That same exact free market, which at one point led to a 7-day work week and unlimited hours per day and no worker protections. He said that the real problem, though, for workers is, of course, President Obama's healthcare reform law. That's actually what we should be focusing on, even though we have study after study that shows employment is not being negatively affected by the Affordable Care Act. Coburn is particularly unqualified to talk about what's good for the economy. First of all, we know that Democratic presidents have overseen every significant recovery in this country over the last 100 years. Secondly, Oklahoma in particular is a state that has been bought and sold by big corporations. They're doing particularly poorly. They rank 44th when it comes to overall health, 41st in income. It has the 8th highest poverty rate in the country. What evidence do we have from anything Tom Coburn has said and from anything Tom Coburn has done in Oklahoma, that he's someone we should be listening to when it comes to labor, employment, and the economy.
Right. I love that this guy seems to have no concept of history or what has happened in this country in the past. And I love the term free market.
Yeah.
It's kind of a euphemism. It's the free market really means Walmart. Let the free market decide. Let Walmart decide. There really isn't a free market. It's kind of a controlled market.
Of course. And of course, let Walmart decide what's best for them while at the same time being highly subsidized by the complete absence of a free market that exists in this country vis-a-vis government subsidies and so many other things that we shouldn't need in the free market, but companies like Walmart and McDonald's are, of course, highly subsidized by. You won't really hear that from Tom Coburn. You also won't hear about his state's rankings on just about everything. You'll hear about how we shouldn't have any minimum wage. It'll just kind of, sort itself out, like that scene in Office Space where they fix the glitch for the guy who hasn't been employed but has been getting paid for years. You just fix the glitch. You don't fire the guy. You fix the glitch. The free market will just naturally decide, Lewis.
Of course. And everyone will be living in a utopia in a few years, right?
Julietta sent me the funniest article. It's funny and sad. An anti-gay Republican turns out to have been a gay bar drag queen and previously gay. Steve Wiles is a Republican state Senate candidate. He supports North Carolina's constitutional amendment against same-sex marriage. He once worked as a female impersonator. I guess that's the official way that's what we call drag queens, at a gay nightclub in Winston-Salem. And he was gay at the time, according to a co-owner of the nightclub and a former employee. We could do an hour show, Lewis, on the phrase, he was gay at the time. I mean, that we could do a week of shows on. We would need a month of Friday shows just to cover that. We're not going to get into that today, but I think most of our audience understands the absurdity of that. Wiles is 34. He was in his early 20s when he worked at the now defunct nightclub called Club Odyssey. He was Mona Sinclair, according to former co-owner Randy Duggins. Mona Sinclair was his female persona. The weird thing is, the explanation, and it's sad that he even needs to give one, but I guess when you're presumably heterosexual and anti-gay, you kind of need to explain why you were at one point gay and working at a gay bar. Sad that he needs to, but in his explanations, he at one point said he's apologized for everything that he needs to apologize for. At another point, he denied that it was him altogether. Of course, pictures that have been uncovered seem to pretty definitively indicate that it was him, and then later made some kind of a tacit admission. My question is, why should this really matter? Many people are asking why this should matter. I completely agree that it shouldn't, and it wouldn't if we didn't have gay rights as a wedge issue where the evangelical right seems to donate and raise money around. It really shouldn't matter, but because of the political context that has been created, the fact that being against same-sex marriage, being for a constitutional amendment to ban same-sex marriage, conflicts with him being, I guess, at one point gay and a drag queen. That's why it matters.
Right. The funny thing about this situation is that if there weren't this idea that you can stop being gay, that you can change being gay,
right,
his explanation would have been, well, no, I was never gay. This was just a thing I did. It was just a job. I thought it was funny, whatever. But his explanation kind of fits into the whole idea that it's just not that it is a choice.
This is actually really sad, right? I mean, yes, he's another right-wing hypocrite. That I don't really care about so much. It's sad that you have to deny who you presumably really are or might be to even be a Republican. That's what's most sad to me about this. This is just a guy. Why should he have to now? Maybe he doesn't even really feel strongly about this constitutional amendment, and he only supports it because he knows he has to do everything he can to distance himself from what he describes as a prior life.
Could be. I almost feel bad for the guy. Almost.
His denials are also concerning just in terms of what else might he be lying about as a state Senate candidate. Fortunately, this guy is not running anywhere that I would ever vote for him. But that's of course, another concern. Next, we will talk to John Kuhn. He's a fascinating guy. We're going to talk all about public education, the rewriting of Texas textbooks, and much more. davidpakman.com/5days now for the very exciting membership special. About 96 hours left on that.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
I'm joined today by John Kuhn. He's a public school superintendent in Texas, a vocal advocate for education, and also author of the book Fear and Learning in America. John, it's really great to have you. There's so many different things I want to talk to you about, but maybe a good place to start is the so-called education reform movement, which is a movement that you say is riddled with scare tactics. So let's start there. What are some of the scare tactics in what is being called the education reform movement?
Yeah, well, so the education reform movement really got its start, or the modern education reform movement got its start in 1983 with a report from the U.S. government called A Nation at Risk. And that report was a really hyperbolic overstatement of problems in the American education system. From that point forward, there's been just this industry of hand-wringing and producing reports and publications decrying the quality of American public schools. A more realistic view of American public schools is that they're not perfect and they never have been. In fact, going back to the 1960s when the first international tests were given to developed countries, the United States scored 11th out of 12 countries on the math test. So there is no sudden crisis in American education. The fact is we've never been good when measured simply by standardized tests. But when taking a look at our students and our schools more holistically, our students compete very well in the world, and you can see that by the fact that those same kids who were in schools in 1983, when A Nation at Risk said, frankly, that our physical safety was at risk because of our schools, those kids are grown up now, and they're running our businesses, they're running our governments, and if you look at Chinese schools versus American schools, we do underperform on standardized tests, but our graduates produce more patents, they start more businesses, they take more risks, and they're more creative.
Okay, so there's so much stuff in there that is related to different myths and so much that's said. So let's see if we can unpack some of these piece by piece. First and foremost, you said that, okay, while it is true that on standardized tests, there are other countries whose students are doing better than American students, that if you look, is it both at productivity in employment and success measured in some particular way that actually graduates of American public schools are keeping up?
Yeah, I mean, there are a whole lot of different ways you can measure the quality of what an education system produces. Standardized tests, we have taken to using those mainly because it's easier. We love measurement in the United States, and we love black and white measurements in the United States. So what we want to be able to do is say, our schools are better than your schools, or our schools are worse than your schools. So we've boiled it down to standardized tests, and that's basically the only point of data that we look at to make these judgment calls. Because we do that, our judgment calls are not accurate. We overstate problems and we understate successes because the successes that we have in terms of, for example, creativity, they're hard to quantify.
So let's pick up on the standardized testing part of it. I get a lot of people who write to me and they're against using standardized testing as either the sole or primary way of measuring how well students are doing, but often they're not completely able to articulate exactly why it is that they feel that that's not a good idea. So can you give us a sense, as specifically as possible, of what the downfalls are to instituting a standardized test measuring system for evaluating students?
Yeah, well, so there's nothing wrong with testing in and of itself. I was a classroom teacher for a lot of years, and I gave a lot of tests. Tests have a role as a tool, but when they become the only tool you're willing to use to judge the quality of your education system, then you basically become blinded to everything else, and you get tunnel vision, where you look only at the test. The natural consequence of that we're seeing in classrooms across the United States right now is that our teachers, that's the only thing that matters, so that's the only thing they focus on. And it's, of course, you've heard the phrase, I'm sure, teaching to the test.
Right.
That's absolutely rampant in our schools in Texas and in every other state because teachers' livelihoods are on the line based on test scores. Your school's reputation is on the line based on test scores. Students' advancement in their classes and their graduation are on the line based on test scores. All the other great things that happen in schools, whether it's extracurricular activities, vocational education, programs that kids are involved in, those things get very little attention. And yet those are the things that we are so good about in the United States. Our kids are involved in a number of activities that we just basically, not just us as citizens, but the media, politicians, we just ignore all that other stuff because there's not a single number on a spreadsheet that we can hook it to.
And this seems to me to be directly connected to this other issue of teachers. And we hear some politicians use this very coded language, which is we need to reward our best teachers, right? And that politically means a bunch of different stuff. So along those lines, is there something unrealistic about this term to reward good teachers in terms of what it might imply we would see from these so-called really good teachers? Are the expectations even reasonable?
No. No Child Left Behind stipulated that in 2014, 100% of American kids would be proficient in reading and math. And the word proficient, that's a nice way of saying they'll pass their tests. Well, 100% of students in no country ever in the history of Earth or any other planet has ever passed all their tests. It just doesn't happen. So to set that in statute and say, oh, we're going to do it, it's great political theater. Unfortunately, it gets translated into real life here on the front lines where I live, where the rubber meets the road in education. And so it's a really dumb thing to do. It's a dumb thing to set all your teachers up for failure and to create this sort of hysterical response to a policy where we're not trying to educate kids anymore. We're trying to not be, hung up in the central square as giant failures. And so that's what our entire education policy right now is built on fear. That's why the title of my book in giant red letters is Fear and Learning in America. The fear has gotten bigger than the learning. This all takes place in a historical context where the United States over the years has always looked for scapegoats to blame our social failings on. And so around World War II, we interned Japanese Americans. We've always had these scapegoats. And so we're living in an era now where because government doesn't want to take accountability or responsibility for policies that can help or hinder equality and poverty and those things, it's just a whole lot easier to say, well, if our teachers would just step it up, everything would be fine.
Well, this is connected with another issue. And because you're in Texas, this is of particular interest to me, which is, of course, you're aware of the movement in Texas around textbooks. And there's the movie, I think it's called The Revisionaries, which is based around the rewriting of textbooks to inject religious doctrine into them. And a lot of the things we're talking about, in addition with the religious component, are being used by some to push school voucher programs, for example, which will pull even more money out of the public education system, sometimes under the premise that a more religious education will be better, sometimes under the premise that private industry is better than the government at anything, including education. Tie those things together as they're going on in your state.
Yeah, and that's a key part of my book, too. You can't disassociate school accountability methods and methodologies from political and ideological preferences of the people who are building these systems. And so, when you hear proponents of these test and punish measures, they're going to tell you, oh, we just want to improve public schools. We want objective measures so we can see how they're doing because all kids deserve a quality education. And it all sounds really good and fine. But in reality, behind the scenes, there are folks with ideologies at play that are involved in making some of these decisions. Some of them have an ideology that is just kind of anti-public services. They don't really want to pay a lot of taxes to have quality public services. So one of the ways, that you can kind of advance that ideology is by constantly decrying the quality of the public services that you're getting for your tax dollars. You want to run down taxes, well, you kind of blow up the public education system. So there's that. There's also a whole testing industrial complex that has grown up around these systems that were devised in the aftermath of a nation at risk. Testing corporations like Pearson in Texas, for example, they have multi-million-dollar contracts. In fact, in the case of Pearson, their largest contract to date in Texas was $468 million to produce tests, which teachers, by the way, produce all the time for free. But it's taken on a life of its own. It's gotten so big and so valuable. You mentioned the textbook industry, which is kind of the same way. now tech industry has gotten to be this gigantic thing that really drives things instead of just providing a service, which was, what they should be doing.
We've been speaking
also,
with, yeah, go ahead, John.
I'm sorry. There's also the kind of anti-union component. There's an ideology at play in a lot of the states of the United States, which is to kind of push for, what's it called, right to work laws. And I live in a state that is a right to work state. Teachers don't have the right to strike. They don't have the right to bargain for better working conditions and those sorts of things. And so a lot of people look at that and they say, well, we need that in our state. So one of the ways you can try to advance that is by kind of demonizing teachers unions. And so there's a real aggressive approach to that. And so all those things kind of get put into a big mix. There's a big recipe, and it's called school accountability, but it's very political.
We've been speaking with John Kuhn. He's a public school superintendent in Texas. I highly recommend the book, Fear and Learning in America. John, thanks for being on and tying together all of this stuff for us.
Thank you so much for having me. I enjoyed it.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Glenn Beck suggested on his radio show that if Hillary Clinton is a lesbian and if she were elected president, she would definitely have sex with a woman in the Oval Office. Of course, she had access to the Oval Office already for 8 years when Bill Clinton was president. So you'd think if her desire really were to have lesbian sex with a woman in the Oval Office, she already could have done it. I don't see any reason at all she would have to wait until she's president. But in any case, Glenn Beck still came up with this hypothesis. Check it out.
I forgot about that, but you got to.
Of course, she's in political and elected life.
Yeah.
So right? Hang on just a second. So what I heard you just say is Hillary came out last year, because I didn't think that had been officially
the arc of history. The arc of history.
I'm telling you, Hillary Clinton will be having sex with a woman on the White House desk if it becomes popular. She'll be just like she'll be like, look, the arc of history wasn't ready for a president to be a lesbian and have sex on the desk.
Is this the type of thing that Glenn Beck fantasizes about all day?
It wouldn't surprise me in the least. Yeah, I would imagine that these are the types of things Glenn Beck thinks about on a regular basis.
I actually think that Glenn Beck does represent the real, sincerely held, I love using that term, the sincerely held beliefs of the Republican Party quite accurately. I just think that most people in the Republican Party are like, whoa, we're supposed to allude to this stuff. We're not allowed to just straight up say that Hillary's too old or that Hillary's a lesbian. You need to use a little more nuance and dance around it, Glenn. If anything, that's what upsets Republicans about Glenn Beck.
Right. And what upsets me is that most people think he's this really intelligent, really thoughtful guy.
Well, hold on. When you say most people, you mean of the people that are his followers, I assume.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. But this is the real Glenn Beck, I think. I think this is the guy that is behind the facade.
You'd think someone would just say, hold on a second. If Hillary Clinton were a lesbian, why would the locations of where she were to have sex be any different from a heterosexual president? And why would it even matter at all? It's just the simplest questions seem to never get asked.
Right, and his mission to completely destroy Hillary has begun because he knows she'll be running. He knows she'll have a great shot at the presidency, so it's time to go to war.
You know this whole backwards, upside down inversion that's going on with so-called religious freedom in this country? Buddy Smith is the leader of a group that opposes equal rights for LGBT people. And he argued this week that businesses in Mississippi, follow the logic here, okay? Businesses in Mississippi were bullying Christians by advertising that they don't discriminate against LGBT individuals. WLOX reported last week that Mitchell Moore, the owner of Campbell's Bakery in Fondren, started providing local businesses with these stickers that say, we don't discriminate. And businesses, about 400 different businesses so far have at least taken stickers. They indicate to people, hey, we don't discriminate against you if you're an LGBT individual or for any reason. We just don't discriminate. And in an interview with One News Now, American Family Association Executive Vice President Buddy Smith said that the decals are an assault on Christian freedoms. It's not really a buying campaign, it's a bully campaign, and is being carried out by radical homosexual activists who intend to trample the freedom of Christians to live according to the dictates of Scripture. They don't want to hear that homosexuality is sinful behavior. They wish to silence Christians and the church who dare to believe this truth. He also warned that if you display a sticker saying you don't discriminate, you're complicit in taking away the rights of Christians. Freedom is a funny thing, Lewis, to these extremists. Don't they realize that businesses are exercising freedom by putting up whatever sticker they want and by serving whoever it is they want to serve? That's actually freedom.
Right. I don't understand what this message is. This is so confusing to me, but I guess this is someone who thinks that just everyone in the country, if they're not living under strict Christian law, is in violation of, I don't know, everything.
This is like a white supremacist saying that businesses who won't discriminate against black people are somehow discriminating against white people, which, by the way, is not really that much of a stretch from what we've heard from white supremacists.
Yeah. If this is discrimination, if this is bullying against Christians, then I'm totally fine with bullying against Christians.
Right. If this is actually the definition of what that is. Of course, we know that real bullying against Christians essentially does not exist in this country.
Yeah. Let's send this guy to Egypt and see what he thinks about the situation over there. See if he even understands the concept.
He's just upset because it's easy to see which businesses are bigoted now. That's all that's going on. Let's go to your voicemails. Our voicemail number is open 24 hours a day. The number is 219-2-DAVID-P. Take a listen to this.
Hey there, Pac-Man. Love the show. I hate that you have to work a bunch more now, but just wanted to say I'm excited that you guys are going to 5 days. That's awesome. Keep up the good work. Doing real media. Bye-bye.
All right. The rare positive voicemail with no negative undertones, sarcasm, or implied ad hominem attacks. Every once in a while we get one, Lewis, and I like to play it. Here's one more voicemail. Listen to this.
Hey, David. This is the Honest Economist. You were right yesterday. I was using sarcasm to demonstrate that many so-called religious people are just self-serving con men. Also, I have a description of you entirely based on things that have been in the media recently, so I know every word must be true.
Yeah.
You are an evil, malicious, gayist, God-hating, Obama-loving, progressive, radioactive, self-destructive, dead, teenage, Jewish neo-Nazi pedophile. Have a nice day.
I heard two descriptors in there that are actually accurate. I heard progressive and I heard Jewish, but just about every other term there that's been in the media is not accurate. Today on the bonus show, we will talk about the Portland water and urine debacle. It doesn't, just the title already makes it an incredible story. North Korea has now put together a list of American human rights violations. And also Japan is cracking down. No, Japan is not cracking down on anything. Lewis, what is our third story today?
Our third story is going to be a voicemail, a question about beer directed towards me from Heather. And it's very important. I'm going to get into some details, very important details about beer.
Are you considered like a beer connoisseur, Lewis? I mean, you admitted recently on the program that you rarely, I think it was on the bonus show, you rarely have more than 2 drinks, period.
Well, I call myself a beer snob.
Okay, very good. All right. Well, so we'll address all of that and more on the bonus show. DavidPakman.com/membership is how you sign up. However, if you sign up before our first Friday show, this Friday, May 9th, you can get a free t-shirt with your yearly membership by going to davidpakman.com/5daysnow. If you're wondering how we are able to expand to 5 days a week, wonder no more. It is because of our viewer support. That's it. So go to davidpakman.com/5daysnow, get the free t-shirt, and listen to Lewis's beer recommendations, his snobbish beer recommendations on today's bonus show.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.